So next, thinking about earthworks and water conservation and storage. So this brings us to two basic strategies that we'll employ in permaculture. One, we can have the diversion of surface runoff to ponds, dams, and or tanks. Meaning that, let's say I was in a place like Africa, a very high evaporation event, maybe close to like a desert. If I try to store water in a desert, obviously in a dam or a pond, it'll evaporate. So it may be appropriate to store it in an underground tank that's closed so that you lessen the evaporation. But in other areas, like here in Thailand, I can store in an open pond. I do have evaporation, but not enough to, say, evaporate the total storage. So also we can store water in soils. So do you put it into a pond or tank or into soils? These are the two things that we're going to look at. Both will result in groundwater recharge. So whether I push it into the ground, obviously that's groundwater recharge, but also a pond is also recharging the groundwater also. So the main productive earthwork features that permaculture looks into is dams and tanks, which we can use for storage, swales, which are known as absorption beds, or as I described, slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in, so absorption. And diversion systems and channels, how do we move water from, say, one storage to another storage? So I may have a storage here. Once it gets to full, it has a spillway, and I would have a ditch to another lower pond that would then fill up, and if it's full, it would go to another pond, and once it's filled up, it would be full. So if you see this pond here next to the classroom, this would be the, say, upper pond on this part of our property, which has a topography this way, and I have 5 ponds that this pond fills up and then overflows to the second one. It fills up. Don't tell the government that the overflow is underneath my house. It's not really legal, but hey, you know, nobody here's checking. So hopefully it never fails. It would be hard to fix. But anyway, it goes under the house to the 3rd pond. That pond fills up, there's a 4th pond. That pond fills up, there's a 5th pond. And finally, if there's excess, it goes to the wetlands. And through that, it would leave our property to our neighbors, who then uses the water, excess water, to do their rice farm. It would be clean. And irrigation layouts is this total concept of how do I, once I have the pond stored, what is the irrigation layout? So now we can see we have a pump here, and we could lay out with a map, right? So we'd see the water storage, we'd draw the piping to the garden, and we'd lay out the irrigation to show how the irrigation was working in the garden. So at this pump, we have a manifold, and I have 4 different valves, so I can send water, depending on where I would like to 4, say, different zones. So one being a garden, I can irrigate either of our food forest, I can irrigate my mother-in-law's garden in the front, I can irrigate our orchard, and I can also irrigate the newly developing mulberry trellises, okay? So these are where you can make decisions on where you want to send water. So, small dams and earth tanks, 2 primary uses. What will we use them for? Watering points for rangeland, so we could go out into a broad scale system. A lot of times the animal capacity that we may see, like in the savannas of Africa, is contingent on the ability for water holes. So people doing conservation will now use computer satellites. They go out, and a conservationist is now going to say, okay, here's a water hole, but the next water hole is 100 kilometers away. What if we put a water hole and dug a water hole 50 kilometers? Then the animals won't have to walk as far in order to have water. That would increase the stocking capacity of the, say, animals in the savanna. Or we could contain and store surplus runoff for use during dry periods, similarly to here at Raktamachat. So I have approximately 8 months a year that I cannot catch enough water for our usage. So I catch water during 4 months of the year, and then have enough storage capacity to have my production capacity for 8 months. So then you have to calculate that. Design considerations that you need to think about anytime you do water storage. Safety. For me, when we first came to Raktamachat, I didn't know much about this, didn't study this, had owned a farm. I knew I wanted to have ponds. That made sense, right? I had been to Angkor Wat. I had gotten a book, read about the fall of Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat fell during what is known as the Little Dreyfus period, or the medieval warming period in Europe, where we had the temperatures that are now 3 degrees warmer than today. Makes it really difficult to comprehend global warming, but okay. And then during that time there was a drought, and Angkor Wat failed because their water storage systems weren't equal to the number of people. At that point they had over 1 million people living there. They were the largest city in the world. Okay? Larger than London, larger than any city in Europe, okay, at that point in time. And it collapsed because they didn't have enough water, because they had a 20-year drought that's not corresponded to anything. Doesn't correspond to, nobody's pumping carbon at that time, guys. So why did that happen? We don't know why it happened. So you can go to tree rings and hey, it happened. So we need to be prepared, irrelevantly to ups and downs, that in any short period of time, really, really small periods, we can have fluctuations that don't correspond to really anything. So at that point, scared me. Now I live in a place, because this actually was under control of Angkor Wat. So if you go to Karat, the temple, you can see, called Pimai, that is the actual model of Angkor Wat. So they built that before Angkor Wat. So that has the first ever four-head exact model. Angkor Wat is just larger. So 50 kilometers from here, we have Angkor Wat, right? They collapsed. Why? Well, no drought. So we need to think about that. So in your design, think about if you're living from water and how much do you need to store to make it through a drought event. 20 years is very extreme, okay? I'm not sure even now we could survive 20 years of the way that we do our agriculture now. But we would be able to survive personally. We would have food to eat. We may not be able to sell any, okay? So that would be a different thing. So think about water harvesting. That's what that means. I need to harvest water for times I don't have enough water. And your total landscape layout is what we're going to look at. So what is your design, and where is the water, the flows, where can you slow it down, where can you store it, where can you move it to, where can you utilize it to create yield. Outlet systems, we need to think about overflow. If there's an extreme event, right, lots of rainfall. So about 8 years ago, there was a big rainfall event here in Thailand, and Korat flooded. And when that happened, the water was flowing over our property so much that it went over the road. So water was going over the road that you guys see about 4 inches deep and cascading over the road and cut about 1 meter of the road away. And it flooded the town of Karat. So that was just an extreme rainfall event. So we can have these extreme rainfalls. So if the water's not allowed to get out, then you'll flood yourself. Equally, if you don't store any water, when there's a drought, you won't have any water. Not last year, but the year before, so 2 years ago, was a drought in Thailand, and it's a 60-year extreme drought event. And you know, I feel sorry for a lot of the people that lived around us, because they're high and dry. And but we were able to run our garden every day, because we were able to store enough water even in a drought in order to facilitate the food for our family. So this is a reason why you might want to take that on, and it may be the best investment you ever made. So let's think about it. Everyone likes the red pots, right? They're nice, handy. Oh man, I wish I could get some of those. And when I tell you the price of them, everyone says, wow, really cheap. So that red pot holds 1,800 liters of water. Pretty decent amount. It cost $20 US. So let's just call it 2,000 liters, $20 US, or $10 for 1,000 liters, or 1 cubic meter. The Traco comes, he digs the pond. He digs for $1 US per cubic meter. The pot costs 10 times more than storing water in the pond. So if I had to store all my water in pots, right, it costs me 10 times more money. We can't afford that. So earth storage, right, storing water in your ponds is cheap. But even cheaper is to store water in the soil. Okay, so we can store more water capacity in our soils than even we do in our ponds. It's probably, again, 10 times cheaper. So we'll look at swaling, right, and key lining to store first in our soils. That's going to recharge our ponds, right? Then we lastly look at storing fresh or drinking water into pots or tanks, right? Because they're more expensive. So I'm going to calculate my tanks for my personalized drinking water, shower water. Past that, any type of irrigation should really be stored into some type of earthworks. So we're going to look at relative placement. Where do you put the pond, and where are you going to put the agricultural thing you're going to need? If you put it too far away, you're going to have to employ pumping. It's going to cost a lot of money. So we want to try to design for gravity flow. So typically permaculturists, again, looking for properties, if available, that have slope. If I can have my pond at the top, then I can open a valve and it lets the water out by gravity, and I don't have to pump water to the irrigation, right? Here, we're basically flat. So if I want to water my garden, I have to employ a pump, right? I can do that with solar, I can do that with hydro, I can do that in many ways, but it's still energy. It'd be nice if I had water stored at height in the landscape. So that's called gravity flow. So we're going to look at all those things and see how we can lay them out, design them. So small tanks and earth tanks. So small earth storage of water can effectively eliminate floods, droughts, and fire risk. If you live in some place like Australia or maybe in California, I can have the ability to have water storage, and if let's say a forest fire or a brush fire comes, I could pump water on top of my house with sprinklers to protect my house from burning, things like this. Some sites, they have free draining soils or deep coarse sands, rock fissured limestone, or steep unstable slopes, and they're not ideal for dams. So if you're looking for a property, you need to make sure that the soil conditions, right, also are in line with being able to put in a dam, okay? For instance, a sister community, Panya, in a different location, they have a really nice slope or topography to their property, but they have sand, very sandy soils. So they actually did earthworks, they put in a dam, Jeff Lawton came, laid it out, they dug it, and it doesn't hold water. 5 years, it didn't hold water. They tried all kind of things like geeling, it doesn't really hold water. So they put in a plastic liner, which is appropriate. They put in a plastic liner, then they put bentonite clay, and now they have a beautiful dam holding water in the landscape, right? This is where we can say people ask, is plastic appropriate? Yes, for sure. They're now utilizing that. It'll be there for 1,000 years, and they can now utilize that for their agriculture, grow the food for their garden, right? So we need to think about that. It's the worst thing in the world to dig a hole and it doesn't fill up. So why do we do that? We can test first. So we can dig a test hole. Number one, dig down. Maybe the top has a layer of clay, and you dig down 1 meter and there's this big sand layer. Wow. So before you dig the whole thing out, make sure that you did a test. So let's assume you did that. Sometimes for professional ponds in the West, they'll come in and drill a core, and they'll take out the core to make sure there's no sand layer. So assume there's no sand layer. Then, and even better, if my neighbor has a pond, it's probably okay that I could do one, but if no one around you has a pond, you should think about that and test first. If I take my soil and I put it in a jar, right, 3/4 full, I pulverize it, I shake it up with water, 1 tablespoon of salt to keep it from going into a science experiment. I shake it up and I put it down and I let it settle for 24 hours. I should see rocks at the bottom, sands, clays, silts, organics. I need to have at least 40% clay or it will not hold water, okay? So as we saw this morning where I was saying, I know I have high clay here, but I wanted to make sure before I didn't put concrete into the reed bed system, right, that it holds water. So that's almost like 80 or 90% clay. It holds water year round. But if you get below 50%, for instance, but minimum 40, it's not going to hold water. So 40% more clay fraction soils will hold water behind dams. And alternatively, most sites will store water if humus soil treatment or swales are tried. But be careful, sometimes it just won't do that. And if not, it is appropriate to put in a liner, okay? And that allows you to store water, which is potential energy, to create more energy. So in permaculture, we look at it from a sustainability point of view. If I employ energy, the plastic liner, but it will capture more energy in its life than it took to make the liner, that's a sustainable decision. So what does this look like in a landscape? We start to see, say, master plans or drawings. So this is a section view, very macro of a mid-slope in a farm. Assume it goes higher, and it even could go lower. This would be in the mid-slope. They employed a dam. This dam could be attached to, so we see the upper swale coming in with the arrow. That's a swale. That could be attached to another dam. That could be the overflow. They don't show here, but assume there might be a dam there. When it's full, it brings the water to this dam. When it's full, it sends the water back out to possibly another dam down the slope, okay? Some things we need to think about. If we have a dam, it's an earthen dam, it could fail. There's always a possibility. We're going to do it right, it should not. But if it did, more than likely it's been raining for 3 or 4 days, okay? It's 4 in the morning, the dam fails, and the water all comes down the hillside and knocks my house off its foundations, and we go sliding down the hillside at 4 in the morning. Not fun. So I lost my dam, I lost my water capacity to create food, and I lost my shelter all at the same time. Put your house offset from the dam or quite far away from it, so that the water would dissipate before it hit you. So here we see the house being quite far away and slightly offset from the dam. The barn, which is nearer to the dam, is totally offset. The barn, we see water storage at the barn, 3 tanks, much more than at the house. The reason is, if they store the water from the barn, it's at height. You open the valve in the house and you have pressure, so I can take a shower, right? And they even have it connected where the water from the storing water at the house, right, could also possibly be pumped up to the barn. Again, we have pressure. You also can take water from the house. So we see two water systems going into this home. One water system is rainwater. They're probably utilizing that for showers, yeah, cooking, drinking. They also have the pond water. The pond water is also entering the house, and Bill has listed flush toilet. So he's using the pond water to flush the toilets. When the pond water comes out of the toilet, it goes to a septic tank. Okay, same that you saw here. We'll go over that more in our water systems day. How does that work? After the septic tank, it goes to what's called an arbor effluent soak system, or a cascading banana circles. One banana circle takes it down to the next one, down to the next one, until finally there's no more flow. The nutrient, and this is the thing that I want to, but we'll get more detail. Today's not the water cleaning day, it's the water storage day. But basically, it's inappropriate to take our nutrients and to pump them into a pipe to a river and out to the ocean, and equally inappropriate to take our nutrients and just pump them straight into the aquifer, okay? Because some people do that through what is called a leaching field. So they just let it leach in. They don't utilize it to grow anything. So in this instance, if you take the nutrients, we grow biomass that we then use into another system. There's no loss. Same concept goes with our composting toilet. The reason we want to capture the compost is to use the compost to grow something else. We don't use composting toilet compost in our gardens. We could have a pathogen transfer. But what we would do is use that compost, say, on our fruit farm. So if we put the compost onto our fruit tree and we take the fruit off the tree, we should not have a pathogen transfer problem, right? In line of possibly in a garden where somebody could get something fresh, or it fell on the ground, I picked up a tomato. Yeah, this type of situation. So both of them are about capturing the nutrient, and then we'll go over those two systems and how each one works and to build them appropriately. So here's more macro view of a nice lands, and it would be nice if you could own a property like this. Has an upper ridge. I can put a pond on top. That's called a turkey nest or high dam. A mid dam, which is at the key point of the property, and a low dam, right? So you could see that Raktamachat has topography like this. We have a low dam. We could go up to midway. That's about where our natural building site is, a mid dam. It sits higher in the landscape than here. And up on the ridge, all the way at the back, I have not built a dam, but I could, in theory, build one. The concept there would be that I would pump water from this dam up to that dam, right? Imagine using solar. So every day the solar comes on, it's a really small hose, and it pumps it up and fills that. At night, if we don't have enough height, but some people do, if you had about 50 meters of difference, you'd pump it up the hill. At night, the valve would open, and the water would come down and run micro hydro. So the dam becomes a battery. And/or you pump with solar up the dam, yeah, during the day, and then you have enough pressure to run your drip irrigation. Yeah, these type of things. This is techniques that people would look at. On this, you see in the center, it's called the key point or nick point. A key point is the intersection between a convex and a concave slope. So where this slope's coming down, this slope goes up, and they meet, that's the key point. We're going to start to learn to identify key points and why, because we can see different types of dams. What dam do we use based on where the key point is in the landscape? So this comes from this picture. P.A. Yeoman has a book that he came out with called Water for Every Farm. And I'll show you later, he wrote actually many books, which is with a basis of permaculture earthworks. So permaculture earthworks comes from P.A. Yeoman's key point or key line systems, okay? So that's like a design science in itself. So what we're going to describe as disciplines. So that's a discipline, okay? So earthworks, we pull from this discipline. If we do soils, we'll pull from like the soil food web. And if we do food forest, we may pull from food forest with like Robert Hart's work or Eric Tolmeister's work. So these are how we cross disciplines to take information, put it together, make permaculture. If we look on that picture where the ridge lines are, there's little asterisks, okay? And when this came out, you know, they're making these books in the 70s. They don't have the printing that we have now. They're not printing in color. So they're a little bit difficult to to do, but we'll hopefully bring that into the modern day today, show you how to do it. But we're going to look at those little asterisks and how to identify where the asterisks are and why.